Dr. Lockitch, one of the main crusades of environmentalism today is climate change. Now, do you think climate change is a problem? And if so, do you think that things like cap and trade are good ways to fight that problem?
Well, you can't take the climate change issue out of context of the broader environmentalist movement as a whole. You have to look back at its history and see, a repeated pattern of making these sort of apocalyptic claims that proved to be false. The DDT scare was the first sort of big environmental scare. Rachel Carson, in her book Silent Spring, was saying that there would be a cancer epidemic, as a result of using DDT. But there's no evidence that DDT is a serious carcinogen. That there's, people ate DDT for years. They did scientific studies of people eating DDT with no ill effects. There's nothing. There's no reason to suggest that the kinds of claims that she was making in her book have any basis in reality. And yet, what was the result? What was the outcome? DDT was banned in the United States. It was dramatically curtailed worldwide, and now over 1 million people die every year, from malaria in places like Africa. In a previous question, we talked about these predictions about population. That there would be a population crash as a result of food scarcity, which didn't come to pass. Climate change is a more complicated issue because it's not completely arbitrary. There are certain facts that they're pointing to, which may give some plausibility to the claims that they're making. We have been burning huge amounts of fossil fuels since the start of the Industrial Revolution, and that does put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. There's evidence that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are increasing. It's true that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It has this effect of trapping outgoing infrared radiation and keeping it in the surface, keeping it in the atmosphere. But what the science has not established is the claim that that increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are the dominant force driving climate. So I think it's not. The science has not established that we are facing any kind of planetary emergency or some climate Armageddon that you hear about all the time. The scientific evidence does not support the claim that we have any reason to fear, especially when you look at things like hurricanes. The evidence that that man-made climate change is going to make hurricanes worse and more frequent. There's absolutely no basis for that kind of claim. So the other part of this, though, is what is it that people are worried about when they talk about climate change? They're worried about that human populations are going to be more vulnerable to climate disasters, right? That we're going to be harmed by rising sea levels, by storms, by floods, by droughts, and so on, right? This is what people are worried about. But if you look at what environmentalists say on this issue, there's no recognition whatsoever of what the real factors are that make people vulnerable to the climate. There's no recognition of the fact, for example, that freer, more capitalistic countries are vastly more able to protect themselves against natural disasters than countries which are not so fortunate to live under a capitalistic system. Look at the earthquake in Haiti versus an earthquake that might occur in America. I think the death toll in Haiti was somewhere upwards of 100,000 people or more. And it's because the political system that they live in is not conducive to building the kind of infrastructure. They don't have the wealth or the ability to build the kinds of structures that will keep them safe. Or look at Hurricane Katrina versus a similar earthquake that occurred in 1970 in the Bay of Bengal. There was a hurricane that occurred that was of a similar magnitude to Hurricane Katrina. Now, the death toll from Katrina, the number of people dead or missing, was somewhere on the order of around 2,000 or so. the death toll from this hurricane in Bangladesh, was something like 300,000 people. I mean, that is a staggering difference. And the difference is that industrial civilization, is what is necessary to keep us safe from climate disasters. Now, what is it that environmentalists are proposing as the, quote, solution to global warming? They want to impose, a massive restrictions on our ability to use energy, which the whole economy depends on. They want to impose regulations that would just completely stifle economic production, economic development. They want to move in a direction of completely reversing the kind of free market capitalistic system, that we need. In other words, they want to move in exactly the opposite direction that we need to make us less vulnerable to climate. So this whole thing is, we're moving in completely the opposite of the direction we need to be moving if, what our goal is to be safer, to be safer from climate disasters. And cap and trade, even its proponents realize it's completely dead as a policy. Nobody's advocating cap and trade anymore.
Going back to what is environmentalism, we say that they masquerade as being concerned with human life when they're not. And this is a good example of the climate, the whole issue of climate. If you actually cared about human life, and if you went to India, and if you went to China, who are now, in both countries are industrializing, and you looked at the squalor in which the vast majority of their population lives, and still lives to this day, and asked what is it that they need more than anything to live a truly human life, they need a modern industrial economy, which they're trying to create in both countries. And that means an incredible use of more energy. And the environmentalists are trying to cut off our use of energy because it supposedly pollutes the environment and creates dramatic changes in the climate. Now, if you leave aside the kind of scare scenarios, a tidal wave engulfing the whole Earth and things like that, and if you ask somebody in India and China, who are already, in India, if you live in New Delhi or Mumbai, you already have incredible heat, you don't have air conditioning, you have to live in those kinds of conditions. If you ask them, would you rather have more energy and it's 2 degrees hotter or 5 degrees hotter, the answer would be for sure more energy, because that is what allows us to cope with climate. So our climate is already kind of unbearable, and it's difficult to have agriculture there. Why are they able now to grow things and have a surplus in agriculture? Because they've industrialized to some extent their whole agricultural practices. Industry and industrial civilization is an irreplaceable value. And in the face of that value, that life is unendurable without it, that it may be, even if one accepted, and I think one should be dubious about this, but if accepted that there's human-caused disruptions to the climate, that is a byproduct that one should readily accept, because the value of the industrial civilization is it really is irreplaceable. If you look at the human population that the globe can support now and versus 200 years ago, why is it able to support human life in a way it could not before? Because we've industrialized. And if you get rid of that, you get rid of human life. So you cannot say that we're against massive energy use and say you're pro-human life.